Tonight, we asked the question, would you join a cult? It's time to get uncanny.
This Uncanny Earth is dedicated to the memory of Todd David Anderson.
Welcome to episode 187. A very ominous episode, by the way, of this Uncanny Earth. As always, I am your illustrious host. And with me is a person who's not so illustrious, but he's still a host. Ladies and gentlemen, Spider.
Illustrious, huh? That's interesting. I mean, who described you as illustrious?
I did.
Oh, well, you know,
I don't
it doesn't
need
count
no
unless you're.
instructions to know how to be illustrious.
It doesn't count unless you're also accredited.
Which I am that as well.
Oh, well, you know.
Actually, I'm an accredited academic.
Did you print out a certificate?
No, I got one mailed to me from the certificate company.
Ooh. It wasn't Universe of Phoenix, was it?
No, it was Universe of
the whole universe of school. You know, not the university.
It was just
but
the
whole
universe. The universe just sent me one. They said, "Hey, we know that you're illustrious, so why not?"
And here's a handshake for your trouble.
Thank you. It was a smooth handshake too, man. Real smooth.
Firm look in your eyes, gave you the job. You're hired.
On the spot. The universe said, "This is illustrious. You're illustrious. Here
Did
you
you
go."
sing that song from that show about the movies that they make fun of?
I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I didn't want to get sued, so I didn't name them.
You know, they can't sue us, right? Just for saying a name.
Well, they could, but they probably won't. I doubt it.
Who would have the audacity to sue us? Well,
I could name some names, but I think they
would.
would fail. Like, those names would probably be really bad at it, and they'd also hire really bad lawyers.
And then what we could do is just sue them for slander.
Yeah, counter-sue all day.
Trying to besmirch our good names.
You can't do that to me. I play blue. Counter-sue.
We already have somebody in the chat, and it's Leah, and she says hello. Well, hello.
Hello, my darling, and whatever that frog
says. I don't know. What are you doing? Doing an old-timey jam?
Yeah, I'm doing what that frog does, because, does frog games.
Well, hello back, Leah. Hello, Penguin. That's what I will say. Listen, it's time for my favorite part of the show and your favorite part of the show, though you'll never admit it, but it's 100% the best part of the show. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for Dad Jokes.
It's time for Dad Jokes. I would probably, if I had that option, if I knew how long your jokes were going to take, just play that song and then, mute you, so I wouldn't even hear the joke. But I got to know when to cut you back in, so...
It's pretty awesome. Listen, so in honor of the show being our 187th episode, and a 187 being the code for homicide, I'm going to tell a homicide joke. It's tasteful. And then you guys are thinking, wow, you've already started the show.
A tasteful homicide joke. You don't hear that every day.
Tasteful homicide joke. Listen,
that's going to get us some complaints.
What is killing your friend called? A homicide.
Yeah, I could react badly to that, but you already told me that one, so I'm just going to let it slide there. And
normally I would have our joke writer Aaliyah send me the joke, but I had to have a good homicide joke for the 187 episode. I had to.
I don't know if there's ever such a thing as a good homicide joke. I
Well, I
mean,
don't know about that.
funny maybe, but I don't know if it'd be good, really.
Well,
I mean,
it could be exceptional and illustrious. I feel like that's the Pee Wee Herman word of the day is illustrious. Like we keep saying it, and everybody's like, yeah, yeah, that's cherry. I'm not. I could make an offhand joke about that,
well,
but I'm not.
time to hit that old dusty trail.
Well, Rusty, seems we've got to dig our way out of another jam. Tonight, we're talking about a very serious subject that I find to be very interesting, personally. And something that I've been studying for well over, I want to say, let's see, I want to say, man, probably 15 years now. And that's cults. My first introduction to cults was actually the Heaven's Gate. Now, me and Spider, we grew up when this happened. I remember when this happened. Like I can remember when it was plastered all over the news. Now, for those of you who don't know what Heaven's Gate was, it was a cult started by Marshall. Was it Applebottom or Applewood? Or
Applewhite.
Something?
Applewhite.
Applewhite. I don't know why. I know I was like Applebottom because I thought about the jeans and I'm like Applewood.
Yeah, I know. I know what you're thinking. I know what you're thinking. So
Easy.
I'm just gonna move on from
no,
there.
I'm not. All right, be careful.
I'm just
It's
gonna
a
move on
family-friendly
from there.
show. All right.
I'm gonna
Relax.
deny that plausibility and just move on from there. All right.
Listen, that's not the point of this conversation. All right. It's not the point of this penguin conversation. Listen, Marshall Applewhite, Applewood. I'm like, I'm hungry for some bacon. Was an enigmatic cult figure, and any of you that have ever watched his YouTube videos, not YouTube videos because obviously, but the tapes of his that are on YouTube, I have to like scroll the screen now because I don't want to look this dude in the eyes. I feel like he would.
Oh no, those are the crazy eyes. Like he had
Crazy
really
eyes,
like
bro. Yes.
there. You listen to him talk, and he sounds like this nice, calm, gentle old man. All this other stuff, but you look in those eyes, and man, it's just you can tell
It's
some
like he's
people
looking
are,
into your soul.
they got the crazy eyes. Like you can tell with some people, they just got the eyes where there's something bad going on there, and you don't know what it
100%
is,
fact.
but ooh.
And he doesn't blink. So he goes a strong 8 minutes. Somebody said, how my man went a strong 8 minutes without blinking and not crying, man. He's definitely on another level. So I watched those videos of him talking about the comet and ascension and all this jazz. And then I watched the people that committed suicide because they all thought that they were going to go to paradise on the tail end of the Hale-Bopp comet.
Mm-hmm.
So they all poisoned themselves by crushing up sleeping pills and drinking it with vodka. And then they had this mass suicide of 39 individuals, I believe. There was more people in the cult. Mm-hmm. But I think our human brains, when we get to a point of like, listen, unless the death is forced, like in the Jamestown massacre, most people will choose to cut ties. They're like, okay, this was fun, but I don't want to give my life for it. Well, these 39 people stayed. And I watched last night, the tapes of these people basically giving their last will and testament on camera. Now, the old people didn't bother me as much. And before you're like, oh, that sounds ageist. No, old folks, they've already made up their mind, right? They've been in the cult for, some of them said since like the 70s, maybe even the 60s. So I was like, okay, you folks are already just, you're solidified. You're not budging from that. You're choosing that. Okay, it is what it is. But then I happened upon a 20-year-old kid. I mean, he was like 20, 21. He was in his 20s. And I'm thinking I'm watching him talk, and I'm like, I remember when I was in my 20s. This is a kid. This is somebody that was on a path and went the extreme route. And from what I read about the young man, he, I believe they made him a eunuch. And for anybody that doesn't know what a eunuch is, basically, from what I remember, it's removing of the testicles so that the person cannot produce sperm. Because I don't think they castrated him, which I believe is a removal of the genitals.
It's a form of castration. I don't know. Like in some cultures, it is a full castration. In other ones, it isn't. But it's a voluntary, mostly, which is the weird thing about it. It's voluntary, because I mean it began in the Middle East because you had the harems and you needed people to watch over them, the guards, and you didn't want your guards like getting with your harems behind your back. So you made sure that they didn't, and yeah, pretty brutal stuff.
So he was a eunuch, and I believe most of the other members were too. A lot of times in cults, that is part and parcel to the whole thing. And I've noticed it's either one extreme or the other. Either it's a sexual cult, which is just nonstop, or it's the exact opposite, and sex is looked at as heathenistic, and you abstain from it at all costs. This one was the latter, and it just made me sad because I'm looking into this kid's eyes, and I'm thinking to myself, man, I remember when I was his age, and I could not for the life of me picture myself joining a cult at 20 years old. At 20 years old, I had a very different attitude of the world, a very not communal attitude. And I'll leave it at that. However, this kid, and what I think had happened, because he served in Desert Storm, so he was over in Iraq. He saw some things, came back with some PTSD, looked at this cult as an out, and when he's talking, he said they even stuck by me even though I was trouble. Like, what did you do for them to still welcome you in? And another odd thing about these videotapes was they all had that same haircut. The bowl cut. Like somebody put a bowl over their head and just shaved around. And everybody had that same haircut. They all had these weird alien names. And when it happened, I remember it being a big breaking story on TV. And I was young. I don't remember how old we are. I know we were teenagers at the time. You were probably a little bit younger than I was because we're about 6 years in difference. But I just remember thinking to myself, why would people do that? Why would you give your life for a cause that seems anti-life in a way? And you're looking at these people's eyes, they look lifeless. Half of them look happy to be there, like, I'm accepted. But they're taking it to a point of, like, I'm accepted and now I'm going to give my life because I believe it. But do you believe it because you believe it? Or do you believe it because somebody likes you, right? And they want you to join them. And you quick fix yourself to that person so that you feel accepted. And a lot of times people will look to better themselves with a cult, rather professionally or personally. Cults aren't always about doing something on a personal level. In many cults, members are given different roles, and that depends on their personality. Like in some cases, people join a cult because of past trauma. And like I said, a need for acceptance. While in others, they join because they want a sense of power and productivity in their careers. In either case, though, a community of people who accept you for who you are is at the center of a person looking to join a cult. Nobody looks to join a cult, people that don't like him. They don't come to you and say, I don't like you. Oh, cool, let me join your organization, because I definitely don't like being liked. And a lot what we notice, too, is a lot of times those in these organizations, they align with a charismatic ideology or a charismatic leader. And a lot of times some members can rise in the ranks of organization. This is in large part to sharing similar interests or personality traits of the leader themselves, and being able to watch as these leaders carry out these ruthless acts of just pure unadulterated violence. For instance, we have Jim Jones. Now, me and Spider, we weren't even born yet, I think, when the Jonestown massacre
No,
happened.
that was slightly before.
70s?
We had the Heaven's Gate, and we had Waco.
Oh, I forgot about Waco. Yeah, David Koresh.
Yep.
Yeah. We also had the guy, the Korean guy, Reverend Moon. Yeah. We had him too. I forgot about that last one. That last one, it just came in the
Yep.
In the top.
Because I remember watching stuff like Waco. I watched that on the news as it was happening when they raided it.
Same.
And man, that was a disaster. Like there were a lot of ways that could have gone better.
That one went south real. When they brought the tanks in, I was like, "What do you like? Why are you really got to bring in tanks for this?"
Yeah, I mean, we didn't even figure this out until much later because as kids, we didn't know exactly what was going on. We just we used to. Back in my school, there was, oh, look, it's the Waco Wacko. He's on TV because, we watched the news and they demonized him. But as the years went on and we found more information about it, it's kind of like, oh, wow, there was stuff going on there, but there were avenues that could have been taken. And
yeah, they could have went in with a special ops team and really just taken him out if it would have came to that.
And a lot of people lost their lives because of a really heavy-handed approach that was really not careful, and that's kind of one of the reasons why they are a lot more careful with SWAT stuff these days. It changed a lot of the textbook ways to deal with situations like that. I mean, people still, unfortunately pass in hostage situations for reasons we can't stop, but a lot of those have gotten better because they had to rewrite the rule book on that. But that was a bad situation. I mean, there were no winners there. No.
That whole thing went south, and it was horrible. A lot of people that shouldn't have been killed were killed.
Yeah.
The only person that really deserved to be killed was Koresh himself. He was a scumbag. No matter how you want to twist it, how you want to spin it, you can't have child brides and call yourself an upstanding member of society. Mm-hmm. But a lot of the other people, maybe not so much. And that's the thing. We went in there guns blazing with a zero tolerance policy when maybe, just maybe, that should have been handled 100% differently. And I think a lot of times we probably took a page from the whole Manson ideology of we don't want another Manson to do what he did. And maybe they looked at Koresh as a Manson type of figure. So they said, we'll just go in there. We'll handle it right quick so it doesn't spread. But what people don't understand is that is exactly how ideology spread from a martyrdom syndrome, where, now this guy was killed. And a lot of people, I saw this, like you said, years later, when people were arguing for David Koresh, they viewed him as a martyr. They said this guy is a martyr because the ruthless government went in, killed him, his family, and it got all muddied. When really, like I said, if anybody should have had to go, should have been him. But they could have did that in such a way that did not involve using tanks. Yeah. It was almost like they were going to war with it was almost like we were going to war with our own people instead of, running a special ops team in there, take him out or take him prisoner. No, we're going to bring a tank and we're going to blow the compound up. And the ATF was not looked upon favorably for that.
Oh, no. They still have problems. I mean, things, like I said, things over time have gotten a little bit better. We end up more positive than negative in hostage situations now. There's a lot more survivors than otherwise now, but people view them with a lot of deserved suspicion. And that's just them. And at the time it was Janet Reno? Janet Reno was the head of the ATF and something.
And I believe Clinton was the president then too. So if I'm not mistaken,
93 probably. I don't remember for sure. It was either him or it was Bush Senior.
Yeah, because Bush Senior was the Iraq dude. Let me see. The Waco incident, was it 93?
Yeah, 93. Because I looked it up while we were talking to make sure.
Wow. It had to be Bush then, because
Yeah.
that's an odd year. So because oh wait, let me see. You're getting to see it live. Oh nope, it was 1993 to 2001. Bill Clinton. So yeah, he was part of this.
Yeah, I figured he'd because '92 was the election year
Yeah, that's
for
right.
that,
You're right.
and he yeah.
Yep. And that whole thing, like I said, it just went south.
Mm-hmm.
Then what Clinton said was that the FBI bore no responsibility for the deaths at Waco. So once again, I mean, not only do you have the ATF that botched this whole thing, you have a president that botched this whole thing.
Yeah, yeah.
And there's nothing you can do once it had happened. You know, this is stuff that people still talk about in research papers and writings some 30 years, 40 years later. And it's SWAT teams haven't got increasingly better, but obviously it's not what it used to be. You know what I mean? And
it's not as
there's a lot of
aggressive is
other
what the difference is.
incidents of
Like
that, too.
they've been like a lot of this stuff is you're not allowed to be as aggressive, which is weird because they had all that stuff like over the last several years about police brutality and things, which we're not going to talk about. I just want to mention it in contrast, in that in the hostage situations things, it seems like with SWAT teams and things they have to be a lot more restrained for a lot of reasons. And by contrast, we're getting a lot more like fatalities in regular police stuff. So it's really interesting. Like and I don't mean interesting in a morbid kind of way, but it's strange how that dynamic has shifted. How now you have a lot more like individual police actions that end up with fatalities versus SWAT team stuff that tends to be a lot more restrained, unless it's like obviously like, oh, we got all the hostages out, now we're going to bust in and just bust the person, because that'll happen otherwise. But you know, it's really interesting, and it's situations like this that led to that.
It's a fine line, because the thing with police brutality, or the thing with the overreaching of law enforcement, it's not as simple as, oh, it was an overreach. There's always parts of the situation that sometimes don't come to light till years later, like in the situation with David Koresh. So it's really a fine line between what is acceptable and what isn't. Like we said, running tanks in there, not so much acceptable.
Yeah, there was some unnecessary escalation there.
Yes. Running some special ops team in to take him out or take him, yes. But, you know, we could sit here and talk about that. And that could have went south too. So you really don't know, because what happened had happened. There was nothing that can be done at this point. You can't just be like, oh yeah, this is what would happen if that would have happened. No, you can't go back and change things. So, but the people that were with him, much like the people that were with Jim Jones and the People's Temple, he had officers. In the case of the People's Temple, it was the administrative triumvirate, or the three chief administrative officers. And those people, Johnny Brown, Carolyn Layton, and Harriet Tropp, they were the ones who supervised the activities of 8 assistant CAOs, or department heads, to supervise 30-plus areas of day-to-day living activities. And some of the officers, like Johnny Brown, had these smiles, good sense of humor, worked well with people, but had that still friendly, intense nature that Jim Jones had. The idea here in cults, a lot of time, is to disarm the people you are trying to bring into your flock. Having someone like this, who has that friendly nature about them, is a key way to do that and really bring the person in. And then what they do from there is essentially break apart self-expression. The funny thing that I noticed too when doing this research for this, cults always come up to you and have questions. Why were we made? Why are we here? What is with suffering? This, that, and the third. It's a questioning of the outside world. But once you are actually in the cult itself, there is no questioning the cult. You don't question your leadership. You don't question your group. You don't question the people around you. You can still question the outside world, but now you can't question. And that sense of self-expression that you had before is steamrolled over for more of a hive-minded existence. The idea of the cult mentality is that they don't accept people that are outside of that person. And when I say that, I mean, like, say I joined a cult and you were like, hey, man, don't join a cult. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, hey, man, these are my new people. You know, we can still be cool. And they're like, no, you cannot still be cool with him because we don't like him. Because he's not a part of the cult. He is an outsider. And they start to brainwash a person to think friends, family, outside of that cult aren't their true friends and family, but rather the people in the cult. And they essentially steal your life. And it's all for the family. That cult family. Not your family. Not your mother, father, relatives, friends, all that. No. Your mother and father are the top cult personalities. Your family or your fellow people, your fellow members of whatever cult you have invested your time in. And once they get a hold of your mind, there's no need for a person to have family. There's no need for you to have an identity at that point, if that makes sense.
Mm. And it's... The problem is that a lot of what classically we assume to be cults, like Heaven's Gate and like what happened in Waco and all that other kind of stuff, is they look for the type of people that need something in their lives. They don't look for people who have it all together. Just be like, hey, you know what? You got things all together. Why don't you bring those brains and those smarts and those everything you know and bring them over to us? Like, whatever. Because a person like that is going to see, hey, you really don't have anything to offer me. I mean, yeah, you're offering me togetherness, but I got to cut everything else out of my life. You know, I mean, it doesn't make sense. But they look for people who are already kind of outcast. They look for people who are feeling like they don't fit in. They reach out to people who obviously need something in their lives, and then they either provide it in limited quantities or they pretend to provide it. So it seems like this is the only place I can get this from. It's like hard drugs almost. It's like an addiction. They give you things that maybe spiritually and emotionally you need, while taking other things away from you. They take away your sense of self. They take away your sense of being a part of the rest of the natural world, and they just continue to enforce that, hey, you know what, if you leave, you're going to have to deal with everything out there again all by yourself again. And that's the threat. A lot of times people stay with cults not because they're forced violently, but because emotionally they don't know what to do outside the cult. They've been a part of it for so long, or even not for very long necessarily. It's just they've suddenly got this thing that makes them feel good, and they don't think that they can live without it. So if they start questioning, then the cult leaders just say, hey, you know what, you can leave. You can leave if you want, but you won't have all this. You won't be a part of this togetherness we have. You won't, you'll have to deal with the cold, dark world again. And a lot of people can't handle that, and so they stay, not because they want to, but because they feel like they have to.
100%. And the key thing to note about all of that is, like you said, they give you that option of leaving. They know in their head, they know you're not going anywhere. Mm-hmm. And if you do leave, it just breaks you even more than you were before. So not only have you been taken in and shown love for the moment, but then you've been mentally broken, brainwashed, then you leave, then you really don't feel like you have a purpose whatsoever. Then you have to try to rebuild your mental blocks from what it was. And the hardest part of all of that is the family. And I mean, if you come into a cult as a family, I'm talking mother, father, kids. Mm-hmm. Because in that regard, the parental role is 100% undermined. There's no debate. You're no longer the parents of your children. The cult is the parents of your children. And it's because of that influence, the cult influence, that children are just treated like property or cogs to a wheel. The Jamestown massacre was one of the most significant ideologies of how they treated children. And during the end of that, because at first the People's Temple, which was in San Francisco, Jim Jones was a very loving person.
He did a lot for the community,
scenes,
according to what people used to say.
Yes. But behind the scenes, this is a different story. At the end, when everybody was made to drink poison, the children were not exempt from that. And I quote, "The children were brought to their death first. 2 young women with babies came forward to begin. Rouletta Paul picked a cup of poison and poured some down her own child's throat, then down the remainder herself, and walked out of the pavilion. The woman behind her followed suit with her own baby." Now, other punishments, and that's the extreme part of this, other punishments included isolation, malnutrition, poor living arrangements, and of course programmed education. If they can get you when you're young and indoctrinate you, it's easier to control you. Yes, you can control a 30 to 40-year-old man or woman, but it's harder because they have already been set in life. So you're not going to be able to just to put in place whatever you want, because a 30 to 40-year-old adult is going to have that bit of critical thinking in their head to say, maybe this isn't for me. Mind you, might be in a weakened state, so they can still be influenced. But a child's a different ballgame. And that's why a lot of cults would have the families brought in, and then it was like the cult was raising your children. You didn't get that same say that the cult did. And the funny thing, and I talk a lot about 30 to 40s and talk about children, but 20-year-olds, when I was 20, we were not exempt from this. Me and a buddy of mine, and I'm going to tell you guys this story. We attended a church that was very cult-like. And we went there, I want to say about 6 months to a year. Well, I don't know about him, but I went there about 6 months to a year myself. And they would do this odd thing where they would talk in tongues. Now, for those of you that don't know what that is, essentially it was a way for the Holy Spirit to translate what was being said into other language so people could hear. This, however, is a different story. If any of you have ever seen people talk in tongues, like actually talk in tongues, different videos, you can YouTube this. It's gibberish. There's no known language that these people are speaking that has ever existed. It's just gibberish. It's this weird sway. And we're talking, this church had thousands of people, maybe more, at its height. I'm not talking about when it started to wane, but at its height. And these people are just, they're basically controlled. And this guy would have like 3 tithes a sermon. So he's like, give me all your money, give me all your money. And the whole time I'm watching these people do this. And let me tell you, there's nothing creepier than watching people basically fall into a trance. But as a group of people, not just 1 or 2 people. And this guy would lay hands, he would do all that. He was a
and televise it. And televise it.
And televised it. Now, the scriptures say to test. They always say to test the people who are doing this. And I said, you know what? Let's test this. Let's test this man's abilities. So I said, okay. So I went up there one night. And as many of you know, I've had multiple ankle fusion surgeries. That's neither here nor there. I went up there one night to see if he could. This was before the surgeries themselves. And I was like, let me see if you can put your hands on my forehead and heal me. I want to see if it's possible. Let's see if it's physically possible for you to do this. I had already had my doubts about the church before. I was never really pulled into it to a place where I'm like, man. It was just some of the people that were really cool, like my good friend. And he put his hands on me like the faith leaders do, and you feel you feel this weird energy. I'm not going to say that I didn't feel anything, but I felt this weird energy, and it was probably because of the hype and all that. And then I got up, and I still had the same physical limitation. And right then and there, I'm like, you're a charlatan. You are a fake. You are not what you have professed yourself to be. A lot of people say, well, that's because you didn't believe. No, because you can't do it. He could not do it. And then and there, I was like, this is very cult-esque. I mean, I already figured it was cult-esque, but that was just solidifying the research that I already put into it. What were you going to say?
And he recently, within the last few years, just passed, too.
Yes.
So he's been around for a long time in this area.
He was almost 100. He was almost 100 years old.
Yeah. And he was still doing his thing. Like, they kept on all the way to the end. Like, there were legal problems and all kinds of other things because people had cut on and they were accusing him of fraud, and he was in some... Like, they were not necessarily in debt, but they had lost a lot of money, didn't they? Like, weren't they in some kind of, like, money trouble?
They bought, like, $1 million jet to go to Africa and I'm not saying don't go to Africa, but they went to Africa and were able to brainwash Africans. Like, they would have full-on sermons on TV of them doing this.
Oh, yeah, because that's where most of their money came from the TV stuff.
Yes. Televangelism was booming at the time. And they went over there and took advantage of Africans. Because it always... And this is something I want to say, too, that really, like, set alarms off in my head. I would ask them, why don't you guys go to Israel? Why don't you go to the Jews? Because as many people know, the Jews, or Judaism itself, doesn't believe that Christ is the Messiah. They're like, nah, it's, he's not it. And I asked a girl one time, I said, why don't you guys go over there? Why don't you guys go to Israel? You guys always go to Africa. And I'd already put it together because they were basically brainwashing Africans. Because people in Africa, they don't know about this guy. They don't essentially know about televangelism. Israelis, they know about this. Jews knew about this. We had a large influx of Jewish populations, the Hasidim, here in New York. So they already had a basic understanding of the Christian religion and Judaism, obviously. But Africans didn't, because they didn't have that same tie unless you were like Ethiopia and that area up by Israel where the ark was supposedly taken down. But you get deeper into Africa, they don't have that. They have spiritualism. They have different identities and belief systems that are nowhere near Judaism or Christianity. And so he went down there and manipulated these people. And so what ended up happening is when I said this to her, I said, why don't you, because wouldn't you think that you would need to preach it to them too? And they said, and she said, and I'll never forget this. She said it in a way that was very spiteful of Jews, essentially saying they killed the Messiah, so we don't do that. And in my head, I'm thinking, wow, that is the most racist thing you could have possibly said. And you were supposed to be like this all-loving church, but you basically just said you don't like Jews. You don't like Jews. And that kind of like struck me as very like, I don't know what to put it. Like I was just, and I was aghast. I was like, really? You really just said that? Those words came out of your mouth. And my father would say too, he'd say, why doesn't he go to like the children's hospital and heal those sick kids? Because that'd be the first, if I can heal people, the first place I'm going.
You got this big old stage. You got this big stage. You're having people come up. You're having people shake and writhe and do whatever they do out in the audience. And we've all seen the funny videos about it. Like they put videos to like metal music and funny stuff. And but that's when you're there. It's pretty disturbing. Like it's actually really disturbing that because people really get into it. They don't just do that for fun and pretend, oh yeah, I'm just shaking around, whatever. They really get into some kind of a trance, and they'd go and they'd do these supposed healings and things, and you think, oh great, look at these people, they could walk again, they got their disease cured. Take that to the hospital.
Yes.
Take that to
My father always said that.
these ICU wards. Take these to
Especially
cancer patients.
kids,
Come
man.
on.
Especially kids.
And it doesn't happen.
No, because he was a charlatan. And Wecos here points out, and that's my homie. That's me and him went to this church together.
Yeah.
He said he had recordings released of him admitting sexual acts with an underage boy, which happened, and one of the pastors was actually suing him for something similar. Every place has issues, but there were direct contradictions that never had answers. And he's right. They had him, from what I had read of the lawsuit and everything else, he would, before men would get married to whoever they were marrying, obviously females, because to them the gay community was an abomination. But get this, he would have them come in so he could basically diddle them, like diddle them. For those of you who don't know what diddle is, basically touching their genitalia. Like, hey, I got to make sure this thing works before you get married. And when I heard that, I was like, that's why you were running from your own demons.
And what's really unfortunate is that while all that was going on, he didn't get formally charged. Like, it didn't come to a head with him, and he passed without those consequences. Because
people were basically shunning the people that spoke out were shunned by the whole. You have maybe a handful of people that spoke out, and that doesn't include people who didn't say anything ever, didn't want to get out because they're embarrassed that this happened. Here I'm a man, and I'm about to get married to the most beautiful woman I've ever seen. I love her, this, that, and third. Here comes Sergeant Diddler and the Diddle Brass Band trying to diddle me, and here I have sat in your church. This is how this church to me was a cult. I sat in your church. Now, not me personally. I had never gotten
right.
I sat in your church, and I believed what you said. I followed you. I thought you were God's person. This, that, and the third. Come to find out, you are worse than your average person. And that whole thing, and I knew something was sour. Like I told you, when I heard the words out of her mouth, I was like, what? In my head, I'm thinking, what did you just say? Did you really just say you don't like Jews because they crucified your Savior? And I'm thinking to myself, but he died for everybody. And the Old Testament is basically about the Jewish people's travels in the Holy Land and everywhere else. But you don't like Jews. That just blew my mind into a whole different dimension. It didn't make sense to me. But once you put the pieces together, and like we said, once all of that formulates, you understand that this dude was a cult leader. He was 100% a cult leader. Now, he didn't have people killing themselves, or maybe he did. Maybe some of these people that had this happen to them, maybe they committed suicide. We don't know. Because I don't know every person that came through there that was, quote unquote, touched by this man. And then you have his church people that, like, his upper leadership, like we talked about with Jim Jones, that essentially, covered it all up. And I was driving by, going to the local grocery store that we have around here, and I saw that billboard of him, and I just wanted to spit on it. Like, you are a piece of trash. You should not have that billboard up there at all. It's one thing to be a person and be flawed and admit that and preach and do that, because I've went to many a church in my lifetime. It's another to act like you are perfect and without sin, and it's like, bro, you can't even get your toupee to look right. You can't fix yourself right. And they would always talk about how modest he was, and that's cult leader right there. Like, oh, he's humble, and I met the man. I met him. And he always seemed weird. He always seemed like one of those wax figures that if he got too underneath the thing, he would melt. It just was so weird. And they didn't allow any other music but country music. That's it. That was God's music. And that's what he said. That was God's music. And I'm like, have you heard country songs?
Especially nowadays. I mean, come on now.
Right.
country
Right.
songs sometimes are worse than like some of the most hardcore hip hop songs that people complain about. They're
Yes.
like, "Oh, this song's all about doing this, and it's so sexist." And it's like, have you listened to modern pop country?
Have you given it a
Oh my
little listen in
goodness.
your ears?
Ooh, boy.
That's the thing about it. You know what I mean? And me and my buddy, we were able to ascertain and discern that ideology. We both knew. We were just there to hang out. Like we would hang out, go like because it would have like a buffet. They had that restaurant that was adjacent to the church. You go there every
Yeah.
Sunday, and
Yep.
we hang out and goof off. And that's what I was there for. I was there to hang out with my people and goof off. And let me also say this: there were some really nice people at this church.
Yeah.
I'll never say there wasn't nice people and good
And
folks.
that restaurant did do a lot for the community. Like from everything I heard, it fed the community pretty well. I mean, it was good prices. It was good. Like it actually like gave people free meals if you were, well, probably a certain kind of poor. I mean, I know,
Right.
and that sounds bad the way I'm saying it, but I don't say that in a way that I'm looking down on. I don't segregate that way.
Of course.
That's how churches like this kind of tended to be. But at least they, certain people in the community got free food when they couldn't have, and they needed it. So it did do some good things, which is unfortunate because it was so connected to something that was really rotten at the core.
Yes. And the funny thing you bring that up. But like even the people that were running the buffet, they got in trouble because people would come in to actually work, but then they would say, "Oh, you're volunteering," and they wouldn't pay them. So here they are working 8-hour shifts, not being paid.
Yep.
And I'm like, just it on the surface, you know what I mean? It looked healthy, it looked good, but when you dug a few feet deep, it was rotten, it was festering, it was
Just
just
like
a
that old radio
maggot-filled
network I used to be a part of.
Easy. That's a cult too.
It's facts, though. It's facts, though.
I'm kidding. Yeah,
Volunteers.
You're right.
Volunteers.
Listen. She would be one. She would definitely be a cult leader if she could do it. 100%. Self-pity, all that jazz, all of it. But that's neither here nor there. The one thing that cults do a lot of the time that we don't understand why people would is they remove the critical thinking aspect of a person's mind. We spoke previous about having that identity, and the removal of critical thinking is important here and ties into the removal of self. The human brain has a vertical and horizontal integration. Now, the horizontal integration is how feelings are put into words to reduce emotional charge and to communicate them to others. The lack of outlet for emotion in this regard allows the brain to spiral into trauma. Now, this is due to the emotional and logical connections becoming rusty, and emotions just circulate the brain unchecked. It just runs wild. In vertical integration, the aspect that decides how we process thoughts, reasoning, judgments, and perception, it gets interrupted. And it doesn't allow us to integrate our feelings, emotions, and instincts with each other. Without proper application of these connections, feelings and critical thinking become subpar, and thus it's easier to be emotionally manipulated. Cults and cult leaders do not allow for their members to question the leader of the movement. Now, like I said at the beginning, the questioning is part of the process in terms of the outlook of the world. But in the inside, there is no questioning. It's at the beginning stage of people saying, "Hey, why is the world like this, buddy champ? Do you want to come join our group of individuals?" This is when critical thinking is the most important. Because the longer you are brainwashed in a cult, the harder it will be to break away, which is obviously the hardest part of some cults. Not all cults. Because not all cults are the Jamestown or the Jonestown Massacre. I think I've been saying Jamestown this entire time, and I'm going to have to fix that in post. This isn't live, is it? The Jonestown Massacre, but some of the other spectrum. They're highly religious. A lot of Christian cults, yes, I said Christian cults, are very apocalyptic driven onto a ideology of we are better than these people, so we're going to survive the end times, and they're not. And I don't like that. I don't like the feeling of and I've been at many churches like this. If you grew up in a Baptist church, which I did, that was the we're better than them. We're the ones who are going to get through the apocalypse with the mark of the beast and with the Antichrist and this, that, and the third, and they're not. And they deserve to burn. And I've heard people say this. I've heard Christian folks say, well, they deserve to burn in hell. And I'm like, what is wrong in your mind where you think that that is an acceptable thing to say? Mm-hmm. It is not acceptable. You should never say that about anybody.
Remove the plank from your own eye.
I shouldn't say that. There are individuals that can be said for. There are individuals that 100% that can be said for. Hitler, for example, it's perfectly acceptable. But the notion of these people leaving or breaking away from cults is deadly a lot of times. You know, because once you leave and more people leave and more people after that leave, that cult leader starts losing their power that they have. And the one thing about cult leaders is they're very ego-driven. And once that ego-driven house breaks apart and the foundation crumbles, they lose their mind. Now, with the whole People's Temple idea, people left when it was in San Francisco because it was still a church. It was still basically like, we love everybody. But once they left the country, that's when they're like, you're staying here. They killed a congressman. Mm-hmm. Congressman flew down to check it out because he had heard reports of murders and things like that. So I'm going to go check this out because, you know, this is serious. Killed him.
And that's really what got them, like...
Yes.
That's what got the attention, and that's why they had to do what... Or they felt they had to do what they ended up doing. Because once you do something like that, that's not just preying off of the population. That's a direct attack against a sovereign government. And at that point, all bets are off.
Which is sad because if... And we've talked about this before. There's crimes that people can commit, heinous things, mm-hmm. that will get them, so many years in prison. But if you do something against the government, well, you're getting life. You're getting everything thrown at you. And this was a prime example of that. Oh, we don't care if you're killing people at first. Yep. Whatever. You're not even in America. And you know what really took the congressman to this? Families. Families were saying, hey, you should go down there and check this out. Mm-hmm. And I don't know the dude's heart because I don't know him. So I'm not going to say he was not wanting to help. But a lot of times until you apply pressure to politicians, they don't do anything. They don't do anything. That's not all politicians, mind you. But a lot of time that's just the facts. Mm-hmm. But in this regard, he goes down there to check it out. They kill him. So obviously you have now killed a government official. Now the government wants to get involved in a situation where the government should have been involved years ago. This is the same thing with Roosevelt and the Jews in World War II. Sent them away. Didn't even enter the war until we got attacked. And meanwhile, they're killing Jews left and right. We didn't want to enter it. None of our business. Out of sight, out of mind. Same thing here. Out of sight, out of mind. It wasn't until the family said, hey, this dude's a wacko. My people are telling me, hey, they're getting letters out. They don't want to be there anymore. They want to come home. This dude is threatening to kill them. Yep. Beating them if you leave. And that is an extreme, sure. Now, other cults, like Scientology, for instance, will just harass you. They'll basically terrorize you if you speak out after leaving. Still, other cults like Heaven's Gate was a different kind of cult because the level of acceptance was so high. They looked at Applewhite as somebody that was good to them and had that power to do it peacefully. I don't mean that peacefully like, yeah, he killed him real peacefully with the sleeping pills and the vodka. Mm-hmm. I mean, he didn't have to assert force in order for these people to join him. Mm-hmm. Jones did. He by the time it was all going down, he was a drug-addled, crazy piece of human garbage. And he's like, and people that didn't drink the poison, he shot them. killed himself, and then his wife or whatever. But with Applewhite, he just had that charismatic personality that pulled in some of the more outcasts of society that couldn't find their answers. And they said, you know what? He's been there for us. We'll join you. We'll join you in this. The Comet's coming to pick us all up.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. We're going to go with you. But once again, the membership was only 39 members. And before it was a lot more because, once again, the idea of taking your life, not everybody's on board with that. They're on board for some of the cult stuff, but a lot of times not that. Now, what makes us as humans want to join a cult? Is it our longing to be accepted by people in a society that treats certain individuals like they don't exist? Is it our need and ability for power and to hold sway over others? The one thing that I think is the key focus is that cults are never going to go away. They're just going to evolve. As we, as human beings, increase in our knowledge and our wisdom, it doesn't negate our wanting of acceptance. Everybody, for the most part, wants to be accepted and loved. Yes, you're going to have outliers, all right? Before anybody starts getting on their laptop and furiously typing, most people want to be accepted. Most. You'll have a couple loners, but most people want to be loved. They want to be accepted. They don't want to be alone. I've never met anybody that just straight up wants to be alone, not interact with anybody. I've never met that person. You know, as curmudgeon-y as my co-host is, he still likes to come over and hang out. So, you know, and just to give you guys a quick example of some current cults, the Kashi Ashram, Raelism, and the Church of the Brethren are all cults that still exist. There's actually a cult in my vicinity. It's about 20 minutes away. It at one point was called the Worldwide Church of, let me make sure I got this right, Worldwide Church. So I want to make sure this is so at one point it was called the Worldwide Church of God. Their headquarters is in Wadsworth, Ohio. But then it was called the Restored Church. So you have, and they still preach a lot of the same stuff. They just did it under a new name. But real quick, Wecos to kind of drop some information there. He said, no free meals, but they did offer meals at a discount during certain times. Just sucks because they expected church members to work for free. I remember that. I remember all
I
of
appreciate that info, actually, because I came into this afterwards. I'm not a native to this area, whereas you are, and Wecos is. But I came in afterwards, and I heard most of the stuff secondhand. So it's actually good to know. It kind of helps me understand the situation a little bit more, which, you know, it doesn't change it too much because they're still, you know, it's still too bad, but at least I get it a little bit more. Yeah.
And like I said, it was a good time for what it was. Like I said, met one of my good friends there. So it wasn't all for naught, and maybe that was the reason why that I went there. To, you know, because when we shook hands, it was like the planet was going to blow up. It was like the mega powers, man. Yeah, the mega powers. So yeah, I mean, but in closing, no, I wouldn't join a cult. I don't have that idea in my life that I have to be accepted. As long as I have people around me that accept me for me and love me for me, I'm good. And if they didn't, I still wouldn't join a cult. There's no, having to lose my sense of who I am for a group of people. I'm good. How about you, Spider? Would you join a cult? Would you ever have joined a cult, do you think, in your lifetime?
I doubt it. I'm anybody who knows me, that I am way too, individual rights, way too, I ain't doing that. Nah, I'm freedom, that kind of thing. I'm not, crazy patriot, go out and wave my flags everywhere. But, I can't. I already have problems with authority in normal situations. So having a whole other thing where they actually want to subsume more of my personality, I think I would have some issues.
Could you imagine somebody like telling us that we cannot indulge in whiskey and adult beverages
Yeesh.
at all? Bro, you gonna have a real bad time. You gonna have a
You're gonna have a
real
bad time.
bad time. So, in closing, I would like to say that I have something on the horizon. I don't know if it's going to go through yet, but it's somebody I reached out to, and hopefully I'm going to get them on the show. I'm not going to say who because they can say no, but I think it would be a really interesting thing to have this conversation with this person. So I sent out an email like last night, and hopefully I got an email back today, and they were talking about setting up a date and coming on the show. So look forward to that. We got something big planned for our 200th episode. So that'll be sometime in July. I think like the first week of July. So we got some real good stuff planned for that. And that's it, man. We got some merch that's going to be coming up soon. Got some T-shirts that are going to be coming up soon.
Just
if you
a
have
heads
an
up.
idea, yeah, go ahead.
Just a heads up, you guys, in preparation for that 200th episode and afterwards, without dropping the details, you are going to want to start subscribing to the YouTube. Okay?
Yes.
It's going to be very
Yes.
important. You will want to subscribe to the YouTube, even if there's not a whole lot. Like we're still, Rob's handling most of that, and it's like a little bit at a time. But it's going to become a real big important thing as time goes on. No other details. I know people are starting to be like, what's going on? What's happening with the YouTube? Oh my goodness. Subscribe to the YouTube. Do it now so that you can find out later as it happens.
Also, we'll be taking trips this month. April, this is the month. We're going to be taking trips. We have a sponsor that's going to be helping us with these trips. We're going to be on location with a couple places. We're going to start out real local. A couple places I've always wanted to go. We're going to go out to those places. And then at some point, I think either this summer or this fall, we're going to be going to Kathoka out in, I want to say Illinois, the big Native American village out in, of course I tried to type it into ye old, because I can't spell this thing for the life of me. Cahokia, and that is in Illinois. So we're going to be headed out that way. Also, speaking of Illinois, make sure you guys go find Alyssa Long. Is it Long? Did I always mess this up?
Yep.
What is it?
Used to be Crane, now it's Long.
Yeah. Go get it, Alyssa Long. She's in the Facebook group. She does readings. Get at her. Hook her up with the donation. She's good people. Do that. She's good people. She's always been good to me and Craig, and she was real good to our friend Todd David Anderson.
Yep.
So make sure you go seek her out. That's it, guys. Next week, we are going to be talking about ancient Egypt and why the world fell in love with it. So join us next week on This Uncanny Earth. And as always, why be boring when you can be uncanny? We'll see you folks next week.